Hey, I didn't see you over there. Well, now it's time to do my Eyre Chapter 35 presentation. I'm Christopher Eyre. So these are the characters in Eyre Chapter 35. Jane. Yeah.
Mr. St. John. Diana.
Connection to the previous chapter. So Mr. St. John invites Jane to accompany him on his missionary journey to India. He sets one condition for Jane to come along, which is for Jane to marry him. Jane refuses to be St. John's wife, but still desires to go to India with him. However, St. John will not allow that. And that is where chapter 35 continues. So chapter 35 starts off where St. John is pushing and trying to charm Jane into marriage. Jane is really hurt and quite annoyed by this because she knows that St. John does not hold any ill intent. But Jane does not want to involve herself in any matters about love. But I don't love you. I know I owe my life to God, and I owe my life to you, but I just wish to be your assistant. This is true. I must find out what has happened to him. It remains for me then, he said, to remember you in my prayers, and to entreat God for you, in all earnestness, that you may not indeed become a castaway. I had thought I had recognized in you one of the chosen, but God sees not as man sees. His will be done. Basically, St. John is putting Jane into damnation because she is not going as God's will for marrying him and loving Mr. Rochester. St. John leaves and Jane finds Diana and tells her that St. John wishes to marry her. Diana is delighted, but does not believe Jane is capable of living in India. Diana says that Jane could marry St. John and she is beautiful. Jane, however, explains that St. John does not love her. Diana then supports Jane. It was supper time, and Jane knew she would then have to meet St. John. St. John starts supper with a reading from the Bible. His voice and manner charms Jane. St. John and Jane are alone, and St. John pushes Jane to make a decision about the marriage. Jane agrees to marry him, but not out of love, but out of service to God and to him. It is then Jane hears a voice she recognizes as Mr. Rochester's. She goes outside to find nothing.
Jane, you have to make your decision. Will you marry me or not?
I must be convinced that it is God's will for me to marry you.
My prayers are answered. Lord, you're quivering. What is wrong? What have you seen? What have you heard?
I see nothing. I hear a voice crying out, Jane, Jane. So, themes are Gothic romanticism because Jane hears an eerie voice that she recognizes as her past lover. She goes out and she sees nothing. The other theme will be religion because St. John uses religion as like his purpose to marrying Jane and his purpose to going to India. Well, my prediction for the future, well, hold on, let me get that.
Seems like Chris just finished his chapter 35 presentation. Looks like I'm gonna start chapter 36. Oh, now that I'm done, I can start. So, these are the characters that we used in chapter 36.
Jane. Yeah.
Mr. Rochester.
Good.
Innkeeper.
Bertha.
Alright, so for the connections to the past chapter. In chapter 35, Jane considers going to India with Mr. St. John as his wife. That is, until she heard a mysterious voice that she recognized as Mr. Rochester's voice. This sparked her inner feelings to reconsider going to India with Mr. St. John. Hey, where you guys are? So, in the beginning of chapter 36, Mr. St. John slips a note into Jane's room. The note says that he will be back and he knows that Jane will say yes and run off to India with him. When Jane thinks of this note, she says this, and I quote, "My spirit," I answered mentally, "is willing to do what is right, and my flesh, I hope, is strong enough to accomplish the will of heaven, when once that will is distinctly known to me. At any rate, it shall be strong enough to search, inquire, to grope an outlet from this crowd of doubt, and will find an open day of certainty." Now, what I think about this, it's like she wants to be with Mr. Rochester, but she also owes her life to Mr. St. John. So, the next morning, she goes off to see Mr. Rochester. And when she gets to the Rochester Inn, she says this kind of important quote, and it's on page 430. And it says, "The Rochester Arms. My heart leaped up. I was already on my master's very hands. It fell again. The thought struck it." Now, when I think about this quote, it seems like her feelings for Mr. Rochester seem to be over-dominating the fact that she also wants to marry Mr. St. John. Now that she got to the Rochester Inn, she's gonna go to see Thornfield. But when she gets to Thornfield, it's a pretty big surprise. When Jane gets to Thornfield, she sees that the whole estate had been burned down to ash. Two very important quotes are said here on page 432. The third paragraph. "No need to cower behind the gatepost indeed, to peep up at chamber lassitudes. Fearing life was astir behind them. No need to listen for doors opening, to fancy steps on the pavement, or the gravel walk. The lawn, the grounds were trodden and waste. The pole yawned void. The front was as I had once seen it in a dream, but a shell-like wall, very high and very fragile looking, perforated with paneless windows, no roof, no battlements, no chimneys, all had crashed in." The second quote is the last paragraph. "In wandering round the shattered walls and through the devastated interior, I gathered evidence that the calamity was not of late occurrence. Winter snows, I thought, had drifted through the void arch. Winter rains had beaten in at those hollow casements where I'd missed. The drenched piles of rubbish and spring had cherished the vegetation. Vegetation, grass, and weed grew here, and between them the stones of fallen rafters. And oh, where meantime was the hapless owner of this wreck? In what land, under what auspices? My eye involuntarily wandered into the great church tower near the gates, and I asked, is he with Damer de Rochester, sharing the shelter of his narrow marble house? Which is a good transition into the next video. So, Jane goes back to the inn and asks the innkeeper what happened to Thornfield. The innkeeper says that Bertha had started the fire and burned down the whole estate. When Jane asks the innkeeper what happened to Mr. Rochester, he says that while he's trying to save the servants, and he tried to save Bertha, Bertha had jumped out the window. Then, a wall had come crashing down on Mr. Rochester's hand. He had it amputated. Also, he had lost his eyesight in the fire. When Jane asks the innkeeper where Mr. Rochester is now, he says he's in a place called Ferdine. So Jane goes to look for him.
What happened at Thornfield?
Well, you see, Bertha got out and she burned the whole estate down.
And to Mr. Rochester?
Ah, now that one I remember vividly. Servants, hurry, get out! No, Bertha, don't jump!
Bertha! You broke it!
Hey, alright, so two important themes. The first one is Gothic romanticism, because all these tragedies that are happening to Mr. Rochester, and it's a romantic book. So Jane is going to find him and comfort him, and they're gonna fall, so that's gonna happen. The second theme is libertinism, morality, because Jane is still keeping the option of Mr. St. John a choice to go to India with him, because Jane saved his life. And James morale is, he saved my life, so I have to give this to him at least. Those are themes.
Jade, is that you?
Yes, Mr. Rochester.